Hi, and welcome to my trip to Israel back in 2023, February actually. I got started on the trip and started realizing that Israel is an amazingly small country. In comparison to Texas, it fits in easily, about the size of the state of New Jersey at the moment, and who knows what it'll be in the future. Here's what it looks like compared to the size of the United States. So that's one country compared to another. My flight took almost 20 hours. I flew from Dallas to Istanbul, Turkey, and then on to Tel Aviv, Israel. Once I got to the airport, I then got into a bus and we traveled up toward the Sea of Galilee. And we got to a very large and old city called Tiberias. You see, it takes about an hour and a half to get from the airport up to that area, which is almost to the very north end of Israel. So it didn't take very long at all. We then went to Arbel, which is in the eastern lower Galilee on the way to Tiberias. A monumental cliff towers up, offering a breathtaking view of the Jordan Valley, the Sea of Galilee, which isn't a sea at all, it's actually a lake, the Golan Heights, and Mount Hermon. This is the Arbel Cliff, the heart of the Arbel Nature Reserve. Arbel rises to a height of 600 feet above sea level and almost 1,300 feet above the Sea of Galilee. It looks out over and can be seen from a great distance. The sites at Arbel include the fortress, an impressive cave village where historic battles were fought in the days of Herod, and the ruins of the Jewish settlement of Arbel, in which the remains of a splendid ancient Galilean synagogue are still to be seen. We then jumped back in the bus for about 45 minutes and went up to the Tel Hazor National Park. It's probably time I introduce you to our guide, Malcolm. He's an Israeli citizen, but was born and raised in Great Britain. So you'll be able to hear him here shortly as he introduces the idea of the era of the kings.
And some of the pillars, like you can see here in front of you, we're going to see very similar pillars like that in Jerusalem from the period of David, in the city of David. So in other words, I'm coming into the period of the kings. The period of the kings is the beginning of the Iron Age. King Saul did not understand iron.
By the way, it's probably a good time for me to introduce you to the idea that the Bible will be used as a history book throughout this lesson. There's much information that has been confirmed and validated throughout the Bible in its archaeology and history, so we'll be referring to it often as we go through these slides. Tel Hazor has some amazing things like Solomon's Gate, the Canaanite Palace, the water system, the Israel Fortress and Ritual Dais, and some residential building and storeroom from the Israeli period. These all date back to between 1500 BC and 1000 BC, so there's some amazingly old structures here that you'll be looking at. Another 30 minutes up the road, and we were at the Tel Dan Nature Reserve. The remains of a 5,000-year-old ancient city. The city reached its height during the Canaanite and Israelite periods. In Canaanite times, it was called Laish, or Leshem. The city is mentioned in the Bible, in particular in connection with the capture of the city by the tribe of Dan, which migrated here from its original land in the Judean plains, and it changed its name to Dan after the forefather of the tribe. Dan was a major reference point in the unified kingdom, from Dan to Beersheba. A couple of other interesting things were the Abraham Gate, or called the Canaanite Gate. Most impressive find of the Tel Dan excavations is the ancient Canaanite Gate. The gate was built of mud and bricks and has 3 arches that are considered to be the earliest of their kind in the entire world. The gate has been preserved to its full height of 7 meters, and the Nature Parks and Authority has implemented measures to protect the gate from weather damage. The Israelite Gate is also here. The remains of the entrance gate from the city of Dan and the fortification walls from the Israelite period. The remains of the palanquin were found at the site, on which the ruler of the city would have been enthroned, alongside benches for the elders of the city. We then reversed course and started heading back down toward Tiberias and the Sea of Galilee. We went to the town of Magdala, so hopefully that sounds familiar to some of you that have read the Bible. We're talking about Mary of Magdala. So now we jump in the bus and we head back down south. As you can see, we skirt right along the Jordanian border here to the Bet Shean National Park, which is filled with a variety of ancient sites that we'll review here carefully. What you're going to see here at Bet Shean National Park are the Roman theater, which is really a testament to the Roman architectural prowess. This theater once seated thousands and remains a marvel to this day. There's a Western bathhouse where you can explore ruins of expansive bathhouse. Back in those days, of course, they didn't have restrooms, so these bathhouses were where people would bathe in water, which is basically lake water. Sometimes it had been boiled first for the very wealthy. Social activity happened especially during the Byzantine era. And then there is the Palladius Street, which you'll see is an amazing piece of architecture where it's basically tiled along the bottom of the street. Then there's the Sigma and Tyche Mosaic, which is a semicircular plaza that once buzzed with commerce and entertainment, featuring a mosaic of Tyche and the city's guardian goddess. Also the Roman temple. So check this out. Just in through those doors is what they call the vomitorium. The Romans were so wealthy that what they would do is gorge themselves on food, and then they would go downstairs into the vomitorium, throw up the food, and then go back upstairs and be fed again while they were watching their show, which has ruins of a very grand temple at one time, and the Nymphaeum, which is a once splendid public fountain showcasing the city's architectural elegance. And then, of course, the public latrine, which is where folks went to the restroom back in those days, and they actually just routed that through little channels in the rock. Here you can see some time frames and some things that happened back in way before time had even begun, right? It's 732 BC. You've got things that have occurred over the period of many different kingdoms. I'm also going to turn things back to our guide, Malcolm, who's going to take us through a little bit more of this.
Because the tell, as it was getting older, was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. It actually came off the tell in the 4th century BCE, in the period of the Greeks, when they were trying to attack into the country. And then Pompey builds a nice town down here. But from the period of the Romans, the Byzantines come and they start rebuilding of all this area, because also the Decapolis is very important, and this was the capital of the Decapolis. And they were made to call this area, the district, they had the Palestina Premier, which is around near Jerusalem, Secunda, which was here, and Trieste, which is down towards Beersheba. And they divide the country into 3. And they do a lot of building. We cut down into a semicircle with a flat stage, which correctly should be timbered, because they had trapdoors that you could go down, dress up as a tree. Ladies and gentlemen, I am a tree, and I get mobile trees on stage.
So let me break in here. Let's get back to this barfing thing. Over there to your right is where they would go out of the building. So before we were behind this, now off to your right, the people were going out there into the vomitorium and then would come back down into this stadium to continue eating and being fed so that they could go and throw up again to show people how wealthy they were.
That's not a local stone. That's you're going to find going down towards Egypt. Okay, from the middle of the Sinai Peninsula, They are classical pillars. That means they are 2/3 straight and 1/3 tapered. So it comes down and it's a tape, and it also gives you an optical illusion of height. There were 3 levels, so that the guy sitting on the top seat of the 3rd level did not come here to see that barren hill. He wanted to have to entertain. And this is what is called a Roman Odeon. Now, in America, it only costs you a nickel, right? You ever heard of a nickel Odeon? An Odeon is a theatre. If it was Greek, it should be 2/3 round and the stage protruding into the middle. That's a Greek theatre. This is Roman. Okay? So you're going more to the Latin than the Greek in the English language. Although you've also got Greek in English. Okay? Which is why you called it, it only costs a nickel, so they called it the Nickel Odeon. Go to England, every other movie house is an Odeon. Still from the Latin.
We then headed over to the Jordan River. You've probably heard of the Jordan River. It's referenced many times in the Bible. It's where John the Baptist did his baptizing, as well as where Jesus was baptized. Many people are still baptized in this river even today. We then headed into Capernaum, which is referenced many times in the Bible as well. And in fact, Capernaum fulfilled such a central role in the life of Jesus that it was sometimes called the town of Jesus. As the New Testament described it, and I'll quote, "And leaving Nazareth, he came and dwelt in Capernaum, which is by the Sea of Galilee." That's Matthew 4:13. Here in Capernaum and its surroundings, Jesus chose his apostles. Remains were unearthed here during excavations of a residential quarter from the time of the Second Temple. Its private dwellings were usually built out of basalt, which was the most common local rock. You can see the color differentiation there. And a typical home consisted of an unroofed courtyard surrounded by rooms that opened into it. Rooms occasionally opened outward. These were apparently shops. The quality of the construction shows the community was a simple one. Next, we jumped in our bus and we traveled all the way across Israel. Yep, it took a little over an hour to go from where we were all the way into Haifa. Haifa is a new and bustling city. Of course, it has some ancient roots as well, but you'll see that there are a lot of modern amenities. It's a larger city. Sometimes you'll hear about it on the news. It was built on the slopes of Mount Carmel, and it has a history spanning more than 3,000 years. The earliest known settlement in the vicinity was Tel Abu Hawam, a small port city established in the late Bronze Age, which is about 14th century BC. In the 3rd century of the Common Era, Haifa was known as a dye-making center. And then over the millennia, Haifa area has changed hands, being conquered and ruled by the Canaanites, the Israelites, the Phoenicians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Hasmoneans, the Romans, the Byzantines, the Arabs, the Crusaders, the Ottomans, and the British. During the Battle of Haifa in the 1948 Palestine War, most of the city's Arab population fled or were expelled. That year, the city became part of the newly established State of Israel. So after spending the night in Haifa, we jumped in our bus in the morning and headed out another 40 minutes to get to Nazareth. You've probably heard of Nazareth in the Bible and in many other ways. Nazareth is a historic city in Lower Galilee in northern Israel. It's the largest Arab city of the country. In the New Testament, Nazareth is associated with Jesus as his boyhood home. And it's in the synagogue there that he preached the sermon that led to his rejection by his fellow townsmen. The city is now a center of Christian pilgrimage. So this one's kind of interesting. We then went over to Megiddo. Megiddo is considered one of the most ancient settlements in the Middle East. It guarded the western branch of a narrow pass and a trade route connecting ancient Egypt to Assyria. The site was inhabited from approximately 7000 BC to 586 BC. In Christian apocalyptic literature, meaning the Bible, Mount Megiddo, the hill overlooking the valley where the current kibbutz is located, is identified as the site of the final battle between the forces of good and evil at the end of time, known as Armageddon, and it's mentioned in the New Testament in Revelation 16:16. Here in Megiddo, you'll also find many Canaanite and Israelite city ruins that we wandered through the remnants of, these two powerful civilizations, where every stone has a story. Megiddo, while ancient, had an innovative water system and mysterious tunnel. Marvel at the engineering genius of the ancients hidden beneath the earth. I thought this was kind of an interesting sight. This is actually a tomb. We saw this along the side of the road on the way to our next adventure, and it was amazing to me that it reads just like the ancient text, where they say the stone was rolled away. And here is exactly the way they used to bury people back in the ancient times. They would put the dead body inside that little cave, and then they would roll that stone in front of the tomb. It took many men to be able to move that stone. After we left Megiddo, we went to Caesarea, and Caesarea is an ancient area with many artifacts, an impressive Roman theater, and you can see it's right there by the ocean as well. You've got the Reef Palace, an archaeological park, the Crusader Gate, as well as the port, which was built by Herod. It was the first quay-based port in the Middle East, serving as a trading hub. And then the Nymphaeum, a reconstructed fountain from the early Roman period. There's also a sculptures park located east of the site. It was amazing. Okay, time for a commercial break. Today's production was brought to you by Coca-Cola Israel. After leaving Caesarea, we spent the night in Jerusalem. Don't worry, plenty more coming up on Jerusalem. But we headed to the Masada National Park, which was an amazing sight. Masada occupies the entire top of an isolated mesa near the southwest coast of the Dead Sea. The rhomboid-shaped mountain towers 1,424 feet above the level of the Dead Sea, which is the lowest place on Earth. It has a summit area of about 18 acres. Some authorities hold that the site was settled at the time of the First Temple, but Masada is renowned for the palaces and fortifications of Herod the Great, who reigned between 37 and 4 BC, the king of Judea under the Romans, and for its resistance to the Roman siege in 72 and 73 CE. Following the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, the Masada garrison, the last remnant of Jewish rule in Palestine, refused to surrender and was besieged by the Roman legion under Flavius Silva. Masada's unequaled defensive site baffled even the Romans' highly developed siegecraft for a time. It took the Roman army almost 15,000 people fighting and defending a force of less than 1,000, including women and children, almost 2 years to subdue the fortress. The besiegers built a sloping ramp of earth and stones to bring their soldiers within reach of the stronghold, which fell only after the Romans created a breach in the defenders' walls. The Zealots, however, preferred death to enslavement, and the conquerors found that the defenders, led by Eleazar ben Jair, had taken their own lives, April of 73 CE. If you look closely, you can see the ramp built by the Romans here. Yep, that's a huge mound in the middle there. Now, we left Masada and headed to Jericho. Jericho is a very ancient city, but along the way I found this very interesting sign. Jericho is in the West Bank, which is controlled by the Palestinians. It says this road leads to an Area A under the Palestinian Authority. The entrance for Israeli citizens is forbidden and dangerous to your lives, and it is against the Israeli law. Now, Jericho is one of the earliest continuous settlements in the world, dating perhaps from about 9000 BC. Archaeological excavations have demonstrated Jericho's lengthy history. The city's site is of great archaeological importance. It provides evidence of the first development of permanent settlements and thus of the first steps towards civilization. Jericho is famous in biblical history as the first town attacked by the Israelites under Joshua after they crossed the Jordan River in Joshua 6. Okay, so it's on to Jerusalem. Our first stop, the Mount of Olives. Gethsemane is a garden in Jerusalem where Jesus is said to have prayed and been arrested before his crucifixion. It's a significant place in Christianity. At the foot of the Mount of Olives in East Jerusalem and across the Kidron Valley from Jerusalem. The meaning of Gethsemane comes from the Hebrew word Get Shemanin, which means oil press. The garden may have been an olive oil grove with an oil press. You'll see photos here of ancient olive trees that are perhaps thousands of years old. Now on to the Great Western Wall, a remnant of the original temple and the most important holy site in all of Israel. This is the area that you see on TV all the time. This is the area that you see the Jews and many others praying. I'll let you listen in to see if you can hear the prayers being said by the people around me.
Your ambassador said, never in the Philippines need a visa to come to my country. That's how it was.
This one may offend your American sensibilities. See how all the men are on the left and all the women are on the right? They are not allowed to pray together, and they're kept separate by a barrier. It is with almost 100% certainty that Jesus stood on these very stairs and preached at the site of the synagogue and the areas where Peter and many of his followers were listening to him as he enlightened them about how the world really works. Here are a few more sites around Jerusalem for you to see, and we'll come back later. Right now, take and enjoy this model of the entire Jerusalem city right there in the middle of Jerusalem. As amazing as it is, this is an actual reproduction of the original temple in Jerusalem before it was torn down in 70 AD. I know it looks real, but in reality, it's just a model. We left Israel and headed for Bethlehem. You've heard of Bethlehem. It's the place where we've all heard of the birth of Jesus. And we even went to a manger that very well could be the area that Jesus was born in. We left Bethlehem and went to the city of David. This is the area where King David actually built his house. This is his house. We walked through the city of David and saw some of the sights. We ended up ultimately going to the top of where the Temple Mount is, where it is often called the Dome of the Rock. Here is a few shots of the Dome of the Rock, and here's an interesting one. There's this gentleman here who is telling these people not to touch each other. We were warned rather extensively by our guides and others not to touch each other when we are up on the Temple Mount in the area of the Dome of the Rock. This is a sacred area to the Muslims, and they forbid it. Here's another quick interesting point. Jewish people are not allowed on the area that we're now walking. They cannot go on the Dome of the Rock or anywhere near it. Another interesting point I discovered is that the Dome of the Rock, that big golden dome, is not actually where the mosque is. That's not where the praying occurs. It actually occurs in this area over here where it's referred to as the mosque. The Israelis don't really mess around much. Here is a photo of our guide talking to one of the Israeli soldiers to try to make sure that it was okay for us to go in the areas that we were going. You can see they are rather well armed and well prepared for just about anything that might occur in the city of Jerusalem. This was an interesting experience. Apparently, some people pray very, very loudly in the city of Jerusalem. You can hear them here.
Who was the first person to use that number?
This is where Jesus had his last meal, the room of the Last Supper. You've seen the famous painting, and you probably have read the story in the Bible. This is where Jesus spent his last evening with his disciples. We then went over to the Via Dolorosa, or the Way of Sorrows. It's a route in Jerusalem that Jesus is believed to have taken his crucifixion. It's a significant site of Christian pilgrimage. The Via Dolorosa is a winding route that starts near the Antonia Fortress and ends at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The route is about 2,000 feet long, and as you probably remember, this is the area where Jesus had to carry the cross before he was crucified. This is the stone that is believed to be the bed where Jesus laid when they prepared his body after he died. That's why so many people are touching it here. This brings us to the site of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which is identified as the place of both the crucifixion and the tomb of Jesus. The church has long been a major pilgrimage center for the Christians worldwide. According to the New Testament, Jesus was crucified at Golgotha, the place of the skull. This has been identified as an area of abandoned stone quarries just outside the city wall. About 10 years after the crucifixion, a third wall was built that enclosed the area of the execution and burial within the city, which accounts for the Holy Sepulchre's location inside the old city of Jerusalem today. And our final site for this particular trip to Israel is the tomb of Jesus. This is the tomb that the rich man had offered up to have the body of Jesus placed so that he could actually be risen from the dead 3 days later. And this is believed to be that actual tomb. At one time, one of those round stones that you saw earlier would have been on the side of this monument. Thank you for joining me on my trip through Israel. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Have a great day.